In this lesson, I'd like to use the DSUM function in a query to create a running sum. From my orders table, I have 830 orders, and I'd like to group all of my employees together in one column, have their total freight charges for each one of their orders individually listed to the right of that, and then another column to the right of that will be a running sum of the total expenses as I go from employee to employee. The first two fields I'd like to bring in are my employee ID, so I can keep track of my employees, along with the freight costs, so I can keep track of each of the freight costs for each of my individual employees for each one of my individual 830 records. And then I'll use the DSUM function over in the third column to create the running sum. Now, to make the running sum work in this case, I'm going to have to identify the employee ID with an alias. So I'm going to come out and give this a name, and I'm going to call this emp alias, and then a colon to give it just a different name. And if I run this, you can see it's now still called employee, but back in the query it'll have an alias that I'll use. In the third column, I'll start by giving this a name, and I'll call this run total, or just run tote, and then a colon to finish the name. And then from here, I think I'll go ahead and use my build tool. So I'll right click and choose build. It opens up my build box, and then from here I want to go ahead and start by using the DSUM function. So I'll type in DSUM, DSUM, and then an open parentheses. And the DSUM requires three parameters. It requires, in this case, the field name followed by the table that the field name comes from. And then I'm going to write an expression that's going to decide what records from the freight field are actually going to be summed up. And it'll extract those records and then sum them all up and give me a value for that. So I'll start in double quotes. I'll type in freight, and then a comma, and then in quotes type in orders, and then finish the quotes and another comma, and now I'm ready for my third parameter. And in the third parameter, I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to actually use the employee ID number itself, not the employee name, but the employee ID, the numerical value. If I open up the employees table and I look at the actual employee ID, I can see they're numbered from 1 through 9. What the DSUM essentially will do in the criteria area is it's going to come out and it's going to say, all right, look at the current employee ID and then take all of the employee IDs that have a lower numerical value for the employee ID and add those up. So for number 1, there's not going to be any. It's just going to be the current freight value total for Nancy DeVolio. And then it's going to go to 2, and it's going to take all of Andrew Fuller's and add those to Nancy DeVolio's, and then put that in the second cell. It's going to go to Janet Leverling and then include that along with Andrew Fuller's and the total for Nancy DeVolio, add all those together and put those in the third cell. So it's basically going to look at the current guy and then take all of the IDs that are lower than it and then sum up those values. So back in the expression builder, we'll start in our third parameter. I'll put in double quotes and I'll just say employee ID. And that's going to take the employee ID from the orders table. And I want to see if it's going to be less than or equal to the emp alias. This is the field that I created earlier. Now, since emp alias is a field name and not a hard-coded value, I have to put this in double quotes. So I'll start double quotes here, and then I will use an ampersand, and then after the ampersand, turn on a light here, I'm going to go ahead and type in my field name, which is emp alias, and then I'll close that with another bracket, finish that off with another ampersand, and then finish that off with quotes. So if it's not a hard value, you have to put it in this way and concatenate a quote with the actual value inside the emp alias field name and then concatenate that with another quote. I'll finish that off with my final quote, and then I'll go ahead and finish that off with a parent. And if I go ahead and click OK and I run this, by coming up and clicking on my run button, you can see that I have each one of my employees for the 830 records, and I see the freight, and I just see the running tote over and over and over again running alongside this. I really need to do some grouping to pull this thing together. So back in Design View, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on my Totals button, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to let's group by the emp alias or the employee ID. Let's do a sum on the freight, and then I want to run an expression over here, my own custom calculation out here for the run tote, and then let's see what we end up with. I end up with just each one of my employees, and I can see the sum of the total freight that is set up here per order, and then alongside I see the running sum. So I have my 3 columns, I have my running sum, things are finished. Maybe one more thing I might do out here is the running total out here is a numerical value. I'd like to just format this with some currency. So what I'll do is come back into my Design View, I'll go back into my Build button, and then out here under Build, I'm going to take this whole DSUM here, and I'm going to encompass this whole thing inside of a format function. And then out under Format, I'm just going to go ahead and tell it what kind of format I want. I'll put in a $, and I'll say 0, 000, period, 00. And that should give me just what I'm looking for here. I'll have to enclose this whole thing in quotes. And that'll give me my comma separator and my decimal for my values less than 1 out here. So finished with this, I'll go ahead and click OK, and when I run this, now I get my currency values, and it looks like I'm finished.